In 2017, May 2017, an 18-year-old neo-Nazi in Tampa, Florida, two of his three roommates. When the police searched the apartment after that double homicide, they ended up also arresting, in addition to the shooter, they ended up arresting a third roommate, one who was not shot. Turns out that third roommate had been stockpiling a huge amount of homemade explosives in their shared garage. In a separate incident, a little more than a year earlier, March 2016, a 28-year-old woman was arrested for robbing 4 different convenience stores in Maryland while armed with a machete. Well, now get this. It all comes together. Turns out the machete wielder and the explosives hoarder then began a relationship while they were each serving time in separate prisons. Aw. Now, today, those 2 individuals were arrested again. Federal prosecutors allege that the 2 plotted to attack 5 electrical power substations around Baltimore, Maryland. Their plan was allegedly to knock out a ring of 5 specific electrical substations all in one day because they thought that would cause a cascading effect to, quote, completely destroy the whole city, meaning presumably they expected to knock Baltimore into a pre-electric light state of being and one that couldn't easily be repaired. Now, if that whole idea to shoot up electrical substations to knock out the power semi-permanently and cause major chaos, if that plan is giving you deja vu, you are not mistaken. There have been at least 9 attacks on electric power substations, at least 9 attacks across 3 different states just in the past 3 months. Early last year, Homeland Security issued a bulletin warning that domestic violent extremists have, quote, developed credible specific plans to attack electricity infrastructure since at least 2020. Now, in most of these attacks, suspects haven't been identified, and that means motives can't be identified either. But last month, NPR affiliates in Oregon and Washington obtained an FBI memo showing that neo-Nazi groups were calling for attacks just like this. The neo-Nazis that the FBI was tracking, quote, believe that an attack on electrical infrastructure will contribute to their ideological goal of causing societal collapse and a subsequent race war in the United States. And that's part of what makes these arrests about this planned Baltimore attack today significant. Because the former explosives hoarder arrested today, he's the founder of a neo-Nazi group called the Atomwaffen. And the former machete-wielding robber, who was also arrested today, she wrote what the FBI believed to be an ideological manifesto of sorts, which both references hitting electrical substations to knock out power, and also her admiration for the Unabomber and for Hitler. Joining us now is Kathleen Belew. She teaches history at Northwestern University. She's the author of Bring the War Home, The White Power Movement and Paramilitary America, which is really the seminal text in this field. Professor Belew, I really appreciate you being here. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I said at the top of the show tonight that this appears to be emerging as a favored tactic of the white power movement and the sort of neo-Nazi affiliated white supremacist movement in the United States. Is that a fair generalization?
Yes, although the electrical part may be new, but infrastructure attacks by this movement are not new. This is a strategy that was pioneered by a group called The Order in 1983, moving forward. And that group is sort of the base of the tactical base for Atomwaffen Division, which translates to the base. So infrastructure attacks are one kind of violence among several others that are all laid out in a strategy in common in order to bring about what the movement seeks, which is the overthrow of the United States, the creation of a white ethno-state, mass violence against communities of color, and even genocide against non-white peoples. So infrastructure attacks sit next to show of force violence like the January 6th attack on the Capitol and mass casualty violence like the Oklahoma City bombing. All of these exist together within one broad ideology in the white power movement.
I've heard this described as accelerationist tactics, and I know that's an awkward word, but I wonder if you can sort of explain the thinking there, because I feel like there's a little bit of a leap of logic to it, which makes it not translate to non-expert sort of just news consumers about this. I mean, the idea is that you'd attack infrastructure, you'd cause people material pain, you'd cause chaos and upset, and then somehow there's a slippery slope that results in race war and white people taking over and genocide against non-white people. Like, why do they believe that infrastructure attacks and resulting chaos ultimately accelerate us to some race war future where they think they're going to win?
So infrastructure attacks and mass casualty violence and show of power attacks are all meant to do the same thing in the ideology of this movement, which is laid out in books like the Turner Diaries and in movement ideological writings of other kinds. They are all supposed to awaken other people to what these activists see as the staggering state of emergency problems that face white people. The woman arrested today in that piece of writing apparently said to an informant that she would do anything for my people. This is the idea of white people as her race and as her nation. It reflects a sense that white people are being extinguished and will be apocalyptically vanished if action is not taken. So infrastructure attacks like taking out the power supply in Baltimore, taking out heat, taking out the ability of hospitals to perform their operations, right? If you don't have hospital electricity, you can't run the basics of any of our systems. These are meant to make other white people awaken to these injustices as perceived by these activists so that everyone will rise up a little bit at a time against the broader, what they would call the system, which is the United States government.
Absolute insanity and holding force on a significant sliver of the white power movement that you're describing, as you said, for at least the last 40 years. Kathleen Belew, Associate Professor of History at Northwestern, author of the seminal text, Bring the War Home, The White Power Movement in Paramilitary America. Professor Belew, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me.
When you start talking about killing, I'm going to make this very clear. That comes mostly under the war section. And I don't talk about the war section, generally speaking, unless I have a lot of time, and I don't have that kind of time to do that on the air. In fact, I've thought about this. When I do get through the war section, how am I going to handle that? Well, basically, I'll handle that, and I'm going to say this now. I'm going to handle that by saying you actually have to go to the book itself.
Okay.
Right. To go to the war and counter-war section. Racism is war. We're already in a war. And the racists are already killing massive numbers of non-white people every day. They deliberately do this. That's what war is. It's not but one war, and that is the war between those who believe in white supremacy and those who don't. That's what it really is all about. All other so-called wars are battles or fights within that war. You might call them small wars. But the war is the war between those who believe in white supremacy and those who don't. That's the war that dominates the planet. Now, in the war section, under the ninth area of activity, war, counter-war, it goes into detail about the only way that non-white people should respond to that in a way of actually using counter-violence as individual persons against the white supremacists. And that's spelled out. All of the qualifications for doing that. And they're pretty harsh, but they are the ones I've come to the conclusion that they're the only ones that can be activated with success if you're going to use counter-war, meaning counter-violence, against the warriors, which is the white supremacists. But I spell it out in detail in the ninth area of activity in the book. I do not like to talk about it on the air for the simple reason that that will add to what? Confusion.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't have any confusion when you start talking about people killing people. You want to be very specific about what you're talking about because it can be confused. Somebody can be misled. Somebody can get the incorrect message. So you don't advocate anything in the way of killing people without going into very specific details about your qualifications for doing so, according to what? Logic, and according to the laws of justice.
Yes.
You want to be very specific about that, and not just say things off the top of your head. And so, therefore, I don't like to go into any details about that. And the code prohibits me from going into details about that, other than the details that are spelled out in the 9th area of activity of the Compensatory Counter-Racist Code book.
As long as white supremacy exists, always think, speak, and act as if you are in a battle zone, and that people, white or non-white, may do you bodily harm at any time in any place. Do not think that any place in the known universe is safe. I'm going to say that again. Do not think that any place in the known universe is not safe. At all times, do your best to be prepared to fight or to flee unjust attack. Danger in the form of injustice or incorrectness exists every place in the known universe. The white supremacists collectively intend to practice white supremacy forever. Read that again. The white supremacists the white supremacists collectively intend to practice white supremacy forever. Therefore, they will eliminate or help to eliminate enough non-white people to satisfy their need to have fun. But they do not intend to eliminate so many that no non-white people remain. They eliminate or help to eliminate enough non-white people as to frighten those who remain. This is the only way that they can continue to enjoy practicing white supremacy. White supremacists not only enjoy eliminating non-white people, but they also enjoy terrorizing, confusing, intimidating, brutalizing, depriving, or making fun of the weakness, stupidity, and ignorance of non-white people. White supremacists intend to do this forever. This is the race war. This is the only war. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Happy Monday, and welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants. I am Joseph Ward, and I am continuing my reading of the United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept, a compensatory counter-racist code, a textbook workbook for thought, action, and speech for victims of racism, white supremacy. And I am covering the last area in the book, Area 9, which is war and counter-war. Now, I picked that clip of Nelly Fuller specifically because of what he was saying. So because of the specificity of this chapter, and as Nelly Fuller just articulated, how it can cause confusion, I'm going to make sure that I'm coming from the information that's in the book and making sense of the information that's in the book. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you like this. Please hit that like button. I need all the likes I can get. Hit that like button, comment, and share this video so as many people can see these reviews of the books and make sure that we get into it. Now, this is the last area. I've completed the reading of this. So the next video will be the beginning of our next book. So as you know, the community tab, check the community tab, because I will have my poll up for the next book or the next author we should get into. Amos Wilson. I'm gonna just throw that out to Amos Wilson, but ultimately the choice is yours and yours alone, and it's not up to me. So when I put the book choices on the community tab, make sure you select the one that you feel that we should read. So let's get back into it. So the first question is, what can be done to stop white people from unjustly eliminating non-white people and to stop non-white people from unjustly eliminating each other? According to compensatory counter-racist logic, and as long as white supremacy exists, nothing can be done to stop white people from unjustly eliminating non-white people or to stop non-white people from unjustly eliminating each other until the occurrence of one or more of the following happens. 1, non-white people constantly eliminate non-white people in numbers equal to or greater than the number of non-white people that were eliminated. 2, white people decide to end white supremacy forever and replace it with justice. 3, the force that created the people of the known universe decides to put an end to white supremacy and decides to put an end to the eliminating of people by any people. The note for this is, All correct thinking people should regard all existence correctly. Since no victim of white supremacy has absolute control over the making of all existence, or has the necessary knowledge and understanding of how all existence is created, then all victims of white supremacy should avoid causing the end of the existence of any person. So remember, we are about defending ourselves, but we are not about the elimination of people unjustly. Any type of eliminating should be for defensive purposes or something that can be just. Other than that, it's incorrect and it's against the code. This includes causing the end of the existence of a person who practices racism. A white person who practices racism is still a person. And so that's where the morality and the humanness of us Black people come in. Now, this does not mean that you take your enemy for granted. That's not what that means. But it means that we are not savages. We are not terrorists. We are not people who go around just eliminating other people just because. We will not tolerate the elimination of ourselves or any other people. Now, we will do what we need to do to ensure that we remain and to ensure that the system of white supremacy no longer exists. And if it has to go to the point of elimination, then that may be what it be. But the object is to replace the system of white supremacy with the system of justice without having to go that far. That's the object. There's no reason in the known universe more unjust than a person who practices racism and white supremacy. Nevertheless, each person in the known universe should be regarded as an existence that has the potential of life. Though a racist white supremacist exists to promote non-life, it is possible that he or she may change it to a person who chooses to produce life. Now, once again, do not take this information and not fully understand it. Do not be confused. Do not take your enemy lightly. Your enemy did not get this far, or our enemy did not get this far being nice. Remember, logic and feelings are two different things, and this is about logic, making the most logical decisions to ensure that justice is produced and justice replaces the system of white supremacy. So this section is violence. The first question under the section of violence. If anyone in the known universe should be harmed, who should be harmed the most? The answer is, according to compensatory racist logic, if harm must be done to a person, it is correct to do the most harm to those races who have been harmed the least after having done the most harm. This is the law of compensation. So this is the question that if anybody has to be harmed, who should be harmed? And I mean, I agree with the logic that the harming should go to people who are the most unjust, if that has to happen. Of course, we're not here to promote harm or promote any kind of violence, anything. We're not doing that over here. But we are talking about logic, and we are talking about war and counter war, and we are talking about the system of racism, white supremacy. And this is the answer that Nelly Fuller has for this question is, well, who should be harmed the most if anybody needs to be harmed? Well, the people who are doing the most harming probably should be the ones who are eliminated. That's a greater way to ensure peace and justice. During conditions in which direct violence is being enacted against you or others near you, try to support and defend yourself and others who are in need by correctly doing the following. 1, acquire and learn how to effectively use tools and/or weapons that are necessary to support and defend yourself against the great and non-just attack. 2, acquire and maintain at your place of residence a minimum amount of those material things that are not essential and or not worthy of serious protection from theft, damage, or destruction. 3, be ready for sudden danger. Be ready to suddenly relocate or be forced to dislocate, and do so with minimum amount of loss, confusion, and inconvenience or discomfort. Be ready at all times for anything to pop off under this system of white supremacy. You can never be too comfortable. Can never be too safe. We must always stay ready. And another part of this is making sure that we are as healthy and in the best shape that we could be. That's part of the counter war. Getting our minds right, getting our spirits right, keeping our bodies in shape. I'm not saying I'm the most fit, but I just started back working out. And I encourage every one of you who's listening to this, who's watching this, I encourage every one of you to go make sure that you are in the best shape that you can be in. That's a part of the counter war. If we're not in great shape, how can we effectively defend ourselves? How can we effectively replace the system of white supremacy with the system of justice if we are not in shape? If we're out of shape, how are we going to do that? It's going to be even more difficult. So do not use a person as a hostage. Do not force any person to serve as collateral or act as an insurance object in any dispute between yourself and another person. The reason is a hostage is a person who is deliberately forced by another person to function as an object or as a commodity for trade, barter, or sale to one or more other people. A hostage is also a person who is forced to do harm to others because of fear of another person who has the power over him or her. All of the non-white people in the known universe are functioning as hostages to those white people who practice white supremacy. Hostages are also slaves. No person should act in support of slavery. So we're anti-hostage, anti-taking people against their will, anti-doing harm to people, anti-putting people in bad situations that they did not ask to be in or they don't need to be in. We should not be the ones who are causing harm to ourselves or others, especially to ourselves. That's one of the tenets of this counter war is how can we effectively counter racism if we are always at war with ourselves, even physical harm, doing physical harm to ourselves? How can we effectively counter white supremacy? We can't effectively counter white supremacy. I mean, we talk about all the time how we don't like white people killing us, but we should, at the same token, not like non-white people killing us. We have to be the best versions of ourselves. Here's another question. According to compensatory counter-racist logic, what is the correct thing for you to do if you are being greatly, seriously, unjustly, or unbearably harmed and you are unable to protect yourself? During the existence of white supremacy racism, do the following. Do all that you can to get away from the people who are greatly, seriously, or unjustly, or unbearably doing you harm. If you cannot get away from those people, go to or send a message to those white people who are best able to protect you and ask them to protect you. And this is calling upon your allies. One thing that we have to understand is in this world, no matter how self-actualized we are, no matter how much self-sufficiency we're operating under, no matter how much of a nation that we become, we need allies in this world that we live in. This is not a nice world. It's not a just world. It's not a safe world. It's not a peaceful world. So you will need allies so you can have justice, so you can have peace, so you can have cooperation, so people can exist and people can not always be in fear. We have to have allies. We have to have allyship. But on another token, we are behind enemy lines and don't have the resources. So we have to rely on others who are willing to help us. During the existence of white supremacy and according to compensatory counter-racist logic, it is the white supremacists who are correctly to blame for everything that happens to non-white people that should not happen. Therefore, during the existence of white supremacy and according to compensatory counter-racist logic, the refusal of an able white person to help a non-white person who is deliberately in need of constructive help is not the act of a person who intends to produce justice, but the act of a racist white supremacist. If you go to a white person who presents themselves as not racist or non-racist, and you are in great need of help and they refuse your help, well, that shows you that they are not what they say they are. Remember, we judge people by their actions and not their words. Black people, we judge people by their actions and not their words. Because y'all know how we get mesmerized, and when people start talking good, we start feeling good. We got to grow up. Whenever the white supremacists offer to provide food, water, or medicine to non-white people, always expect the air, food, water, medicine, chemicals, etc. to have the direct or indirect effect of poisoning the minds and the bodies of the non-white people who receive them. During the existence of white supremacy, racist men and racist women have been known to use disease and drugs to do great harm to the minds and the bodies of the non-white people of the known universe. As long as white supremacy exists, this should be expected. Avoid doing bodily harm to any person, white or non-white, except for the following reasons. But hold up, before I get into that, I'm gonna read that again. Before I get into that, now it's talking about different types of warfare. During the existence of white supremacy, racist men, racist women have been known to use disease and drugs to do great harm to the bodies and minds of those non-white people of the universe. So we're talking about physical warfare, spiritual warfare, mental warfare, emotional warfare, psychological warfare, environmental warfare, any type of warfare, cyber warfare, any type of warfare that you could think of. Environmental warfare is something that we don't talk about. Chemical warfare is something that we don't talk about a lot. The biological warfare, agents of biological destruction, we don't talk about a lot. Look at what has happened. We have a lot of questions about a lot of the diseases that exist, because when the diseases are released, no matter where they are released, it seems to affect the people of color the most. Remember that white supremacists will always have casualties of war on their side, but the intended elimination of non-white people to keep us in order. Because I agree with Nelly Fuller, and he said it earlier in the book that, I also agree with this. Like I say, I don't think that their overall intent is to eliminate all of us, but I do think there are factions of them who are intent on eliminating a number of us to keep the rest of us in check. This is the consequence of you bucking the system. So if you're not a part of the go along, get along game, you increase your chances of elimination. But remember the types of warfare that exist. It's not just physical. War, remember, the actual physical confrontation when it comes to war is usually the last step. We are at war, but it is not at all times a physical war. So we must pay attention to all types of warfare and everything that is happening to us, how it's happening to us, why it's happening to us, and who is doing it to us. What's the end goal of it all? So avoid doing bodily harm to any person except for the following reasons: the just, correct, and direct defense against bodily harm. Everybody has the right to defend themselves. The just, correct, and direct defense and or security of essential material possessions. The just and direct defense and security of people other than self, or the essential materials or possessions people other than the self. And sometimes you have to defend what's yours and defend other people. We're all about self-defense. We're not about inciting violence or enacting violence on anyone. But we're going to do what we got to do to protect ourselves. And every human being has the right to protect themselves from any threat, that is especially a threat that could oppress them or eliminate them. Avoid giving armed assistance to any racist white supremacists or to any armed or violent forces that are dominated or controlled by the racist or suspected white supremacists. The reason is it is unjust or incorrect to say or do anything that helps the racist or suspected racist, to say or do anything that helps to support racism. If you are supporting the racist, then you are helping to uphold the system of white supremacy so it can maintain itself, so it can continue to refine itself. That's what you're doing. You gotta make your mind up. You're either for it or you're against it. You can't be for it, but helping to prop it up by giving assistance to white supremacists. You got to make your mind up. Here's another question. What is the difference between violence and counterviolence? Now we're getting into the thick of it. Yeah. What's the difference between violence and counterviolence? Because we do not promote violence, but let's learn. So violence is any willful or deliberate act that is designed to do unjust harm. Violence is any willful or deliberate act that is designed and intended to do unjust harm. That is the compensatory definition of violence. Counterviolence is any act that is intended to stop those who willfully or deliberately do unjust harm. Counterviolence is any act that is intended to stop those who willfully and deliberately do unjust harm. Nonviolence is the complete absence of violence and the complete absence of counterviolence. Nonviolence is the complete absence of violence and the complete absence of nonviolence. Here's another question. As victims of racism, what is the correct way for you to regard violence, nonviolence, and counterviolence? As victims of racism, what is the correct way for you to regard violence, nonviolence, and counterviolence? The answer is be against violence. Be in favor of nonviolence to the exact extent that an unjust aggressor is unviolent. Put that in perspective. Be in favor of nonviolence to the exact extent that an unjust aggressor is nonviolent. Nonviolence should be matched with nonviolence. We've already seen that matching violence with nonviolence doesn't work for us in the long run. But you match nonviolence with nonviolence. We are nonviolent until we have to defend ourselves. Be in favor of counterviolence to the extent that it is necessary in order to help end racism and to produce justice. There's only one reason for violence, and that is for the production of justice. Defending yourself is the production of justice. Here's a note. Anyone who says that he or she believes in nonviolence should be willing to prove it by never using physical force against any person at any time for any reason, and by never asking others to do so. So if you say you're about that nonviolence life, you need to live that nonviolence life. Your actions must match your words. If your actions aren't matching your words, then you just talking. So if a person says they're nonviolence, but their actions don't match that, then don't take their word on it. Here's another question. Is the threat of violence the same as violence? Is the threat of counterviolence the same as counterviolence? The answer is threats of violence are forms of violence if the threats result in the reactions that cause unjust harm. Even just a threat can cause harm. Even a threat can cause unjust actions to follow. So threats in themselves are acts of violence. Threats of counterviolence are forms of counterviolence if the threats result in stopping the violence. So counterviolence is the threat of counterviolence is the same as counterviolence. Yes, because the threat of counterviolence will be, I put this threat in place to counter the violent threat that was already put out. So the threat of counterviolence, which means that I'm using what I can to stop violence. Remember, the physical encounter is the last step. Threats are made all the time, but threats of violence are violence, and threats of counterviolence is counterviolence, because the threat of counterviolence will be used to counter the threat of violence. When there's debate or confusion about war and or counter war involving the words America, Africa, and Asia, say the following. Okay. During the existence of white supremacy and according to compensatory counter-racist logic, America, Africa, and Asia all have the same definition as the word justice. The word justice is correctly defined as balance between people and or guaranteeing that no person is mistreated and guaranteeing that the person who needs the most help gets the most constructive help. White supremacy and justice does not and cannot exist in the same universe at the same time. Neither can America, Africa, or Asia. America, Africa, and Asia are not places. They are concepts. They are concepts of places that have that are ruled by justice. They are the concept of justice that now exists only in the imaginations of people, because the idea of what America could be is not what America is. So according to compensatory counter-racist logic, America is only a concept. Now, when justice prevails, then America will be, in fact, something that's real. But as of right now, America is a concept because there's no justice in America. There's no justice in Africa. There's no justice in Asia, the South Pacific, anywhere around the world. There's no justice. So all countries, continents, and things are concepts. Now, white supremacy is the greatest and most powerful form of non-justice. It is not only a concept, but it is real because it is what's happening. It exists. It actually exists. It is the dominant government of all of the non-white people of the known universe. It is the strongest religion against the non-white people of the known universe. It actually exists, and it actually affects every facet of our lives. Never bribe, demand, or force any person to eliminate or in any way do bodily harm to a person. If it is your will to have bodily harm done to a person, it is correct to do it yourself. If you intend to eliminate people for fun, for glory, or for material gain, the person who should be eliminated is you. We are not prescribing violence. We are not advocating violence. We're not creating monsters. We're not creating killers. But we will defend ourselves, and we will replace the system of white supremacy with the system of justice. So here's another question. If the white supremacists show that they intend to eliminate all the non-white people of the known universe, is it correct to stop trying to speak and to act to replace white supremacy with justice? The answer is no. No, 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 no. Never stop. Never stop having justice as the main thing that runs the society. The only reason to stop trying to replace white supremacy with justice is when white supremacy has been already replaced with justice. Therefore, you will need to replace white supremacy with justice because you already did it. According to compensatory counter-racist logic, the force that created non-white people will act and or help non-white people to act in such a manner as to guarantee that the white supremacists will fail if they attempt to eliminate all of the non-white people. So it is the belief of Nelly Fuller under counter-racist logic that the universal force, what a lot of people call God, will play his hand in ensuring that all of the non-white people will not be eliminated. But he's not saying that this force would ensure his hand in making sure that the system of white supremacy is replaced with justice. So we got work to do. According to compensatory counter-racist logic, if all the non-white people in the known universe have been eliminated by the white supremacists except one, it is correct for that one non-white person to do all they can to speak and act effectively to replace white supremacy with the system of justice. It should not get to that. It should not take that. But that person should still have the will to replace the system of white supremacy with the system of justice. But it should never get to the point to where there's only one person working. It's sad enough that we have a minority of us working now. It's already sad enough. But we have enough of us to do something. But it should never get to the point to where there's only one non-white person left in existence. What have we been doing? We've just been sitting around just letting it happen. Even more than what we're already doing. So at some point, basically what this is getting at is at some point, we're going to have to do something in some manner. That doesn't mean it has to be violent, but we're going to have to do something. Never under any circumstance eliminate a person and conceal or attempt to conceal the fact and the truth that you eliminated that person. In other words, stand by your work. If you're going to be tough, stay tough. If you're going to do the crime, stand by your work. Don't be the person who doing something and hiding your hand. Nope, 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 nope. If you're a big bad eliminator, be a big bad eliminator when the authorities come. All right, that's what he's saying. To eliminate a person and not be willing to say to all others that you eliminated that person is one of the greatest acts of self-contempt that a person can commit. and one of the greatest acts of contempt for the all power, which is God. The white supremacists are not only the most powerful and most influential people in the known universe, but they are also the masters of glorifying and making a sport of eliminating people and hiding or making a mystery or a guessing game of the identity of those who were eliminated. Of those who did the eliminating. They particularly enjoy this when they are the ones who are doing the eliminating. Here's another question. If enough non-white people speak and act according to the United Independent Compensatory Code system concept, what should be expected? What should be the expected logical result? The answer is the white supremacists of the known universe would be forced to decide whether to eliminate all of the non-white people, or they will be forced to decide to end the system of white supremacy and replace it with the system of justice. So if all black people decide to get on code, white people gonna have to make a decision because there's too many of us. Now he's talking about all black people in the known universe. So all black people that we know that's on this planet are all non-white people, but specifically all black people on the planet. But all the black people on the planet get together and decide that we want to be codified and to work together and help protect ourselves. The world would change. The world would change. We probably wouldn't even have to be violent. The world would change. But we got to reprogram ourselves, though. We got to do a lot of reprogramming to get to that. Now, let's talk about snitching. What is snitching according to compensatory counter-racist logic? To snitch is to willfully and deliberately volunteer information about a person with the specific intention of gaining personal favors and or praise from the racist. Meritorious manumission. That's what that made me think about. Meritorious manumission. I'm going to do what I have to gain favor from the white people. When victims of racism carry messages about and or witness against any person in a manner that gives aid and comfort to the racist, such actions only help to promote injustice. It is just and correct for all persons to the best of their will and ability to avoid situations wherein they believe they may be tempted or expected to snitch. Snitching does not mean speaking to protect yourself from false accusations or from other unjust acts. Snitching means to say something to try to take an advantage of someone else by taking unjust advantage of his or her lack of correct judgment. When you're trying to get yourself out of a situation, and you don't mind jamming somebody else up, you a snitch. Snitching, let me read this. If you give constructive information to or about a person, is that the same as snitching? This is what I was about to say. So I'm gonna read this first before I go into that. So the answer is no. So let me read it again. If you give constructive information to or about a person, is it the same as snitching? The answer is no. To snitch is to use or offer information in such a manner as to do unjust or incorrect harm to a person, creature, or thing. This is not the correct thing to do. The correct thing to do is to give constructive information and give it in a manner that guarantees that no one is mistreated and guarantees that the person who needs help the most gets the most constructive help. If something goes wrong, someone does something wrong, and you tell on them, you're not a snitch. You've done just and correct actions. I've said this for a long time. Hey, man, don't do criminal and crazy stuff around me. Don't do unjust stuff around me. Don't cause harm to other people around me. Because I'm telling. But what I won't do is try to give some information about you to get you jammed up to get myself out of a situation. That's snitching. I'm not going to lie on somebody else. Or I'm not going to manipulate a situation to get myself out. That's snitching. Snitching is not doing the right thing. If you see one of our elders get jammed up by one of these young Thundercats and you speak up about it, that's not snitching. That's how you create a just society. Standards have to be set. New standards have to be set. New ideas have to be in place. New codes have to be in place. If you're doing something you ain't supposed to do and somebody tell on you, hey, you shouldn't have been doing it. We're supposed to be just people. When there's confusion about what is snitching and what is not snitching, say the following. Everyone who mistreats anyone should be known to everyone. It is impossible to snitch on a mistreater. Everyone who mistreats anyone should be known to everyone. It is impossible to mistreat. It is impossible to snitch on a mistreater. If you out there mistreating people, we tell it. We're about justice, all right? Here's another question. What is the correct thing to do about non-white people who give aid and comfort to white supremacists by snitching? They're treasonous. That's what they are. Wait for the white supremacists to use the information in a harmful and correct manner and then respond by compensating for the harm done through effective speech and or action directly against the white supremacists. His explanation is, taking such action against non-white people who snitch to racists only increases conflict between the victims of racism and does nothing to stop or hinder the racists, right? So when you see somebody who's working on behalf of white supremacists, we have to find the best strategy to counter how they can benefit from that information, to counter how they can benefit from those actions. And then when the time comes right, the non-white person who snitched, well, you know what next. So here's a note. All information that is passed between people should always, without exception, have the effect of helping to produce justice, guaranteeing that no person is mistreated and guaranteeing that the person who needs the most help gets the most constructive help. It's real out here. Do not assume that those racists who fight and or eliminate one another are not racist. So yes, this is a good one. Self-sacrifice on the part of the white supremacists happens. We talked about this in the past, and we'll just reiterate it again. Do not think that just because one white person is willing to eliminate another white person, that white person is a non-racist. Whites have casualties of war. They understand that sometimes some of their people got to be eliminated. Sometimes the white supremacists have spats between each other. And the result of those spats sometimes is the elimination of one or another. Right? So don't be fooled by a person's actions either. It's hard to really know the real intent or to judge how fully committed to stopping racism a white person is, especially a white person who does not practice the system of white supremacy. And this is because of the system of white supremacy, because of the deceptive nature of the system of white supremacy. It's hard to tell who's who. Yes, pay attention to what people say, pay attention to what people do. But remember, people's actions can also be deceptive. But look at patterns, look at behavior, do the best you can to observe and pay attention. In accordance, and this is the section of counter war. In accordance with the law of compensatory counter-racist logic and the law of compensatory counter-racist counter war, the white people who choose to disregard the harm that is done to non-white people as a result of white supremacy are entitled, because of their disregard, to receive the same type of harm or to a degree of harm that is intended upon non-white people. You heard what he said. As long as the white people of the known universe choose not to end white supremacy, but instead choose to continue to practice and benefit from it, it is incorrect for them to regard themselves as being mistreated if they receive harm as a result of having made those choices. This is not a movie. So we're not looking at people with all the empathy and all these things. To look at your actions. We've seen your actions. You are not worthy of being spared. You are not worthy of justice. You must, well, you must be dealt with in a proper manner. That doesn't mean that person has to be eliminated, but that person has to receive punishment. What is the correct thing for a non-white person to do in response to those people who willfully, deliberately, and unjustly eliminate, assault, maim, terrorize, SA, or rob non-white people? During the existence of white supremacy, it is correct for a non-white person to do the following. Ask all power God, the creator, for guidance in helping to do what should be done to stop the unjust harm. 2, announce that you are blaming those white people who participate in the practice of white supremacy for being the cause of the unjust harm. 3, ask the white people who are not white supremacists to protect you from the unjust harm. 4, if for any reason the white people who do not practice racism do not protect you from the unjust harm, ask them to help you or allow you to protect yourself. 5, do not expect any people to protect you from the unjust harm or expect them to help you or allow you to protect yourself. 6, if the white people who are not racist will not or cannot help you to be protected from the unjust harm, do one or more of the following. Try to move as far away from them as you can. 2, if you cannot move away, or if it is too difficult to move away from them, try to protect yourself from harmful people. C, for any reason you cannot protect yourself from unjust harm and you cannot get the white people to protect you and you cannot move away, then you should try to do all that you can to eliminate any harmful forces that's happening against you by enacting maximum emergency compensatory action. So what is maximum compensatory counter-racist action? So what is maximum emergency condition? So we're going to learn about 2 things: maximum emergency condition and maximum emergency compensatory action. So in racial matters, a condition of maximum emergency exists whenever white supremacy is established, maintained, expanded, or refined any place in the known universe by the direct use of violence or the threat of violence used. Under white supremacy, a condition of maximum emergency means that an individual victim of white supremacy racism for reasons known to him or her no longer has the will to submit to and or cooperate with any part of the system of white supremacy dominant at any time for any reason to any degree. So that is maximum emergency conditions. The conditions that we currently exist under are maximum emergency conditions. They've been like this since first contact. So maximum emergency compensatory action. What is that? Maximum emergency compensatory action is a swift, efficient, unannounced elimination of one or more people who intend to harm victims of racism, acting openly and alone and at a time and a place of his or her own choosing, and after commencing such act immediately continues without respite or surrender until he or she is forced to eliminate him or herself rather than be eliminated or captured by others. Maximum emergency compensatory action is the willful and deliberate elimination of one or more racists through elimination, and the willful and deliberate elimination of self through elimination. By a victim of racism acting alone according to a detailed plan and acting only after he or she has judged that he or she could no longer endure the effects of racism, or that he or she is no longer able to effectively promote the production of justice, except by eliminating one or more racists and then eliminating himself or herself as a subject to the racist. So if a non-white person feels that they can no longer exist under the system of white supremacy, therefore they are, according to compensatory logic, within their right to enact maximum emergency compensatory action to counter the racism. And if that such person has some success or failure, they should make sure that they do not become enslaved. Maximum emergency compensatory action is enacted only under prolonged conditions of extreme suffering and practically hopeless deprivation caused and or promoted by white supremacists. Maximum emergency compensatory action is the promotion of the production of justice under the racial conditions of maximum emergency. So still about justice. It is the only willful, deliberate, and the final act of counterviolence that a victim of racism should commit against white supremacists. It is only in defense of yourself and in the promotion of justice. Maximum emergency compensatory action is a just and correct form of counter-war. It helps to promote thought, speech, and or action to oppose war. Maximum emergency compensatory action is not the purpose of traditional profit or for revenge. Maximum emergency compensatory action is not for the purpose of traditional profit or for revenge. It is not for traditional purposes of direct or indirect personal protection. The non-white person enacting the execution of racists also executes himself or herself rather than continue to be subject to racist white supremacy. Here's a question. When is maximum emergency compensatory action necessary? The answer is a victim of racism may find it necessary to enact maximum emergency compensatory action only after he or she, one, has tried and failed to get the racist to stop practicing injustice by repeatedly asking for justice. Two, has tried and failed to remove himself or herself from the direct or indirect power of and the dependence on racists in all areas of activity. And three, has spent a substantial portion of time and energy attempting to accomplish the aforementioned to the extent that he or she is reasonably certain that the racists do not intend to stop the practice of racism in time to keep the effects of such practices from becoming totally unbearable. So if it gets to the point to where system is unbearable, according to compensatory logic, a non-white person can enact maximum emergency compensatory action. Who decides when maximum emergency compensatory action is actually to be enacted? The answer is only the individual victims of racism can or should decide the exact condition in which he or she will enact maximum emergency compensatory action. It only can be enacted through the will of the individual victim. The enactment of maximum emergency compensatory action means the willful and deliberate elimination of the existence of one or more races. The willful and deliberate elimination of any existence, whether person, plant, or animal, is a serious act. No existence of any kind should ever be eliminated unnecessarily. It is never necessary to eliminate existence except when the law of compensation demands it. The law of compensation requires that when one person plans and willfully and deliberately executes another, that person must also execute himself or herself. Once again, violence is not being promoted. Violence is not being tolerated. Violence should not even be on the table. But because of the system of white supremacy and because of the violent and terroristic nature of white supremacists, we should always be willing and able and prepared to protect ourselves. Is a victim of racism justified in acting as judge, jury, and executioner? How and why does such action promote the production of justice? The answer is, in the socio-material system dominated by white supremacy, there are no people in the known universe who are justified in acting as judge, jury, and executioner against the white supremacists, except the individual victims of white supremacy. The white supremacists function as the most powerful people in the known universe. They do not judge against themselves. They judge in favor of themselves by judging in favor of the maintenance of white supremacy. The white supremacists do not accept the judgments for any reason, thing, or force that opposes the existence of white supremacy in any manner that is effective. The victims of white supremacy, however, are not collectively a counter-racist counterforce. If they were, they would not be victims of white supremacy. They would be a collective of a collective counterforce against white supremacy. We got to get our stuff together. Not being united is hurting us. Being too individualistic is hurting us. We got to get our mind right. Since white supremacy is all engrossing among the people of the known universe, and since it dominates all of the so-called groups of non-white people, then the only effective force by people against the white supremacists must begin with and be sustained by individual victims of white supremacy speaking and or acting in a united independent fashion like atoms, molecules, or single sparks of fire. Under white supremacy, each victim is alone, and the very conduct let me read that again. Under white supremacy, each victim is alone, and the very conduct of white supremacy prevents its victims from formally organizing as a group against it. This leaves only the individual victim of white supremacy as the only direct self-sustaining opponent of white supremacy. This is not only functional, but also just and correct. This way, no individual victim has to rely on other individual victims in order to oppose white supremacy. In effect, this is self-reliance in its basic form and is the basic essence of compensatory unity for a racially subjugated classification of people. So it's already built in counter-racist logic that we're going to operate as individuals. So in operating as individuals, we have to equip ourselves as much as possible to be able to oppose white supremacy. Be the best that you can be to fight white supremacy. What is meant by the terms degree of pain? How much pain should a victim of racism feel and or tolerate? What is the correct measure of suffering for a victim of racism before he or she enacts maximum emergency compensatory action? The degree of pain felt by a victim of racism as a result of white supremacy is known to no other person than the person who feels it. It is therefore correct for a victim of racism to enact maximum emergency compensatory action only if that degree of pain is unbearable to that person for a prolonged period of time. And so, coming to the end of my reading, and basically, maximum emergency compensatory action is the action of literally fighting back, protecting yourself against harm, unjust harm. This last area of war and counter war, he wants us to understand that according to compensatory logic, we're at war against white supremacy, but we're also at war against ourselves. And that is a result of white supremacy. That is a symptom of white supremacy. That is actually a part of the plan of white supremacy, as I just read, for us to act as individuals, to behave as individuals. Racism is a team sport. At the end of the day, it's a team sport. But I understand the logic. Because racism is a team sport, our team has been disjointed. And because our team has been disjointed, we have to learn how to operate as individuals to be able to carry out specific missions to help us produce justice. But if each individual is the greatest versions of themselves, we will work and seek justice. And for us to have justice, we will have to be codified. And so we will start to unite under a code. But that comes into us being better Black people. We got to be better. I enjoyed reading and reviewing this book. If you don't have a copy of the book, remember there's a link in the description. Get your copy, the United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept. So Area 9 starts on page 359 and ends on 399. So make sure you do your reading if you haven't done your reading. I highly recommend people read this book. Do I agree with everything that's in this book? No. Some things do need to be updated to 2023. Some things do need to know how to be applied to what's going on today. But it's a great book along with the ISIS papers. I believe the compensatory book and the ISIS paper go together. Read one, read the other. Now let's make sure we continue our reading. So as I stated earlier at the beginning of the video, I will put book choices on the community tab that'll be there waiting on you, so you can choose which book that we read next. I recommend some Dr. Amos Wilson, but it's not up to me. It's up to you all. It's your choice. The choice is yours and yours alone. But get your copy of Nelly Fuller Jr.'s book. Real good book, great book. His seminal work. This book is one of the foundational pieces in helping us understand the psychology of the white supremacists, but also to understand the psychology of the victims of white supremacy, who was us, to understand ourselves as victims of white supremacy, right? To not be victims in the mind, to not be victims in the mind, to work to improve ourselves and improve our neighborhoods and our communities and improve our conditions, to unite under the compensatory code. And therefore, we will be a formidable opponent to the system of white supremacy. We have to be. We have to be. We have to be. It's the only way we can produce justice. And that's what we're here about, to end racism and to produce justice. We're not here to convince white people to do anything, but we are here to do what we need to do for self. This is all about self-reliance, self-sufficiency, Black people, especially Black people, being better, doing better. Hey, man, I love you all. I enjoy reading this book. I really enjoy reading this book. So I love you all. I'll make sure y'all catch the next video, and make sure y'all put y'all votes on that community tab. Holla at y'all.